Today, I'm driving a 1961 Ford Consul Mark II. Hello, and this large chunk of Dagenham's finest Americana is a code 204E 1961 Mark II Ford Consul. Now, I called it Americana, and with good reason. Look at this thing, look at the styling, and then go and find a photo of a 1956 Ford Thunderbird from America. The fins, the big grille, the round lights up on the top corners. This is basically austerity Britain's version of American extravagance. This is jet age styling brought down to earth with a bump for Britain in the post-war years. Now, although this was the optimistic 60s when things were good and life was bright, Britain was still that little bit drab, no matter how we sugarcoat the history and swinging 60s it. Look at this crease on the top of this big wing which projects forward of the engine and bonnet line. Down at the back we've got quarter lights opening at the front, not at the back, wrap around rear window. How cool is that? Very Teddy boy. And look at this, we've got the actual fin here with a subtle sub fin just gently creased into the metal pressings. Ford of Britain's large family lineup was basically this car in 3 different trim levels. The same body shell, but given 3 separate names and identified and thought of as totally different cars really. The 4-cylinder Consul sat at the bottom of the pile. Next up was the Zephyr, and then finally at the top was the Zodiac, or Zephyr Zodiac, or Zodiac Zephyr or something. It was a long time ago, I don't know. If you're the company boss, the factory manager, a successful policeman in Z-cars perhaps, that's what you'd be driving. But today, we're not. So let's look around this 1961 example. The Mark II Consul ran from 1956 to 1962. Being a 61 car, this is fairly late on in production. There had been a Mark I which came out in 1951. We'll talk about one of those on another video. In 1959, 3 years into production, the Mark II had a bit of a refresh. They called it the Lowline, with a different roofline, lots of different bright work, different tail lights. In 1961, they gave it a new name as well. It became known as the Consul 375, so technically, this is a Consul 375. In mid-1961, they gave it a new name as well, a Consul 375. I'll have to check what date this car was built as to whether this is a 375 or not. You can tell they really are desperately trying to pull the American strings here. You've got a hood release, not a bonnet pull. This engine doesn't look very big, but it's actually a 1.7 or a 1702cc 4-cylinder. And it churns out an astonishing 59 horsepower and 91 foot-pound of torque. It doesn't exactly give blistering performance. The 0 to 60 is 22 seconds. When you look at how tiny that little carburettor is, it's not really that surprising, is it? My favourite bit of dumb trivia about one of these cars, Morrissey used to have one. It was white. And this heater is made by Smiths. I'm waiting for the laugh. Suit yourselves. This boot's not a bad size for a 1960s car, to be fair. I mean, the thing is, because there's no plastic lining or rubber coating or anything, this edge of the boot here is the actual skin of the car, so you need to be careful you don't put anything big and heavy that's going to be flying back and forth, because it will put wounds in the car's bodywork. But it goes back a fair way to the back of the passenger seats, and you've got big cubbies here. Well, cubby is just a big corner basically. This Pelly plastic case is maximum carry-on airline size, so it gives you some kind of sense of scale of how big this area is. You certainly get a week's shopping in here if you're taking it to supermarket. You've got a full-size spare wheel, which does take up quite a lot of space because it's not tucked over to the side of the car at all. It's literally here, just plonked in the boot, very much in the way. And a large amount of space behind that, which is handy for putting tools and things that you probably carry in a 60s car, because if you're going out in an odd motor, you're going to want to have a few spanners and maybe a set of jump leads in it. But it's got a nice textured rubber lining, and the floor in this car is absolutely amazing. Apparently had one tiny bit of welding in the floor on the rear wing about that kind of side about 10 years ago, and a complete respray at the same time, and utterly rust free. This is all original from Ford back in the 60s. One thing that is quite nice, I don't know if this is original or not actually, you can probably tell me in the comments, but this looks like a hydraulic strut. It's not, it's a big coil spring, and it's got a plastic kind of coating around it, so you don't get anything caught or dirty on the spring itself. Now, sorry, stepping onto a bit of paper in the car because it's a bit muddy out, but this interior is beautiful. It's pure 60s British Americana. Briticana? I don't know. But look at this marvellous bench seat. Technically it's a 2-seater car because you've got 1 seat in the front and 1 seat in the back. Well, technically that's not true. It's a 6-seater because you've got the column shift and your dash mounted umbrella handbrake. you can fit 3 people across the front and 3 people across the back. In the front it does have seat belts for 2. These are, I believe, Britax aftermarket belts. There's a label here on the dashboard, so I'm guessing someone safety-minded fitted these at some point in the car's history, but I do not believe they would have come as standard when the car was new. Now, climbing into this big drive-in theatre ready bench seat, you've got your huge Bakelite style, I don't think it's Bakelite, but it's that kind of feel of plastic, hard-rimmed, 2-spoked wheel with this beautiful, almost like a glass little logo in the centre. Is that the horn? Whoops. And that, which doubles as the horn. But you have this amazing full-width turned aluminium dash detail panel. It's absolutely beautiful, starting with the Consul logo here on the left in front of the passenger. In fact, this logo is absolutely everywhere on the car. It's one on each side of the back, there's one on the boot, there's a word Consul spelled out on the bonnet grille. You can't forget what you're in, and the Ford logo is splashed around liberally as well. In front of you, the driver, you've got this wonderful, got a silver painted detail backed speedometer and mile counter. You don't have a trip meter, just a total one. This car is only showing 41,000 miles, but there was a documented speedo change back in the 1970s, I believe, so it's probably got around 78,000 miles in it, I think. There aren't many controls to speak of in here. Starting with the door, we've got these nice little lockable quarter lights, or quarter vents if you're in some parts of the world, and these wonderfully detailed door furniture. The sharp crease on the top of the door handle and window winder going into a nice point on the cone of the base of it. It's absolutely fantastic, very, very jet age, lovely bit of mid-60s styling there. It's wonderful. In front of you, you've got a 2-stage pull for the lights. You've got a turn knob for the wipers. They're vacuum operated, so I think they're the ones that go slower as you go faster, so great. There are 2 unmarked little warning lights. One's green, one's red. One's ignition, one's... I don't know. The green and red, they both go out when you turn the engine on. I think the red is ignition, I'm not sure what the green is. You have a speedometer which goes up to 100 miles an hour. I think the top speed in this car is about 87. And you have a fuel gauge and a temperature gauge. That's really it. And of course you have a choke because it's the 60s, and oh, windscreen washers as well. I won't push that again because I don't want wet windows, even though it's going to rain soon. Now below that we've got the big vent from that Smith's heater which is under the bonnet. It's a one big vent there, and there's a couple of vents up onto the windscreen, and just 2 controls, one for the direction off int, which I guess is for intermediate height, and screen, and then you've got hot and cold with boost in both directions. So if you want extra hot or extra cold, it'll do that. I guess it's a higher fan speed. Or not. And to the left of that, and bear in mind that this whole lower section of the dash is a knee, very unfriendly, hard metal panel, and you can see why cars like the Rover P6 with its padded dash bins was such a revelation compared to this, where if you hit this with your leg, you're losing your legs. Solid metal on the driver's side and a glove box on the passenger side. And below that we've got another large storage shelf, very practical, but it is edged in a thick metal bar. So if you don't lose your knee on there, you're going to lose your shins on that in an accident, so that's a little bit worrying. And in the centre, we've got more of this turned aluminium, a different, more kind of lined, stripy pattern this time, coming completely across. Very reminiscent of a mid-60s Thunderbird. Use this style of embossing a great deal on their interiors. So it's a very, very American styling detail. There's a round blanking plate, which may have been for a cigar lighter possibly. There's a large ashtray with a button which looks like a cigar lighter, so I'm going to say that was probably a cigar lighter if you paid a little bit more. A square blanking panel with a Ford logo, which I think would be an ideal place for a radio should you spec one, and of course your umbrella parking brake. If you've never driven with one of these 3 on the tree style of gear changes, it can look unbelievably daunting, but in fact it's really easy. Just imagine a standard H pattern that you have on a regular floor mounted manual gear shift and stick it on its side. So towards you and down for first, just like a regular gear shift, back to the middle as always, away towards the dashboard and up for second, and straight down for third. If it was a 4-speed, and this is where you could make a mistake, second will be straight up from first. In this car it's reverse. If you get that wrong, it makes a horrible noise, so don't get that wrong. Oh, and glancing briefly at the floor, which I almost forgot, it's not got carpet, it's got really heavily textured rubber coating, so it's very hard wearing, I'd imagine. It's got heel pads as well, and it's got floor mounted dipper for the lights. So you pull your lights on here and then dip them on and off with the little button on next to the clutch. Let's have a quick look in the back and then we'll take it for a drive. Well, access is a little bit tight, squeezing into the back, but once you're in here it's not too bad. I mean, typical of cars of this era, there's not a lot of knee room, and you look how thick this bench seat back is, it's like that. You can sort of see why. There's none of the clever sculpting into the rear of the padding to make it more room, as you would find in a slightly newer car, or even some of the more expensive contemporaries like a Jaguar or a Triumph or a Rover. In the back of the seat you've got these fantastic roll-out Ford ashtrays, which I was still using well into the 70s, I think even the early 80s. I remember them in my parents' cars. As kids in the back would be spent hours just flipping them and rolling them in and out, pointlessly and probably very annoyingly. You've got the same really nice jet age styled door handles and same nicely padded armrest on the back doors as well as you have in the front. Same very deeply heavily sprung padding in the big bench seat, and also someone's added a pair of inertia reel seat belts into this car, so you could take your family out in this car with a bit more safety than came as standard. Headroom, because it's a very tall car, is quite good actually. And bear in mind this is the Lowlight. How tall was the Highlight before? Wow. But no, this is generally speaking quite a nice place to be, just a little bit tight on the knee access. Ugh. Now these Britax belts can sometimes take a bit of getting used to, but this isn't too bad. Now, let's give you your first taste, once there's a gap in the traffic, of driving with a column shift. That's first and easier way. Up, forward and up into second. Down to third, and I'm going to stop because there's a car coming. Back to second again, and there's trucks and traffic. Nice and easy. I'm going to put the side lights on. Oh, there we go. It's a little weird when you first drive one of these like this, but to be honest, you get used to it really, really quickly. And in fact, oh my god, this is such low geared steering. It's a heavy car and no power steering, so they've geared the steering for ease of use. As I was saying, once you're used to a column shift, it's actually really sensible and really practical. It makes it very easy because your hand is just so close to the wheel, you never really take it very far from your steering position. So it actually kind of makes good sense in a way. So I say a big thank you to Sussex Classics in Crawley Down for the loan of this car. Their website is in the link below, so check them out. They've always got some cool stuff in stock to look at. Thanks guys. 0 to 60 time on this car is not blistering. I think the factory figure was around 22 seconds, and the Motor magazine in early 60s tested it to around, I think, 23 seconds. So not the fastest car in the world, but it's not that kind of car anyway. It was a family car, not a performance car, and it wasn't even billed as the performance model. If you wanted performance, you went for the 6-cylinder, the Zephyr or the Zodiac. This gave you the looks but without the bang for a significantly cheaper amount of money. But you know, it's got a bit of get up and go. And in terms of practicality and safety, in 1960 disc brakes became an option on these. In 1961, so this car should have it, disc brakes became standard with servo assistance as well. So you know, there is a bit of stop with your go. Something I didn't mention a minute ago is that the bench seat does actually roll backwards and forwards. The steering is incredibly low geared, so it's about 97 turns lock to lock, which takes a bit of getting used to when you hit a sharper bend. And the ride is weirdly bouncy. It's quite a firm ride from the springs, but at the same time it just rolls like crazy into every bend. In terms of popular culture, these things were absolutely everywhere in the 1960s, and they were just Britain's street furniture for decades. In the 80s you could pick them up for 50 quid for a rusted out rotten example. But now you just don't really see them around so much anymore. And I know Fords always seem to be very popular as classics go, but I can't remember the last time I saw one of these on the road. But back in the day, it was your dad's car, your best friend's dad's car, your bank manager's car. Every police force had dozens of them. If you got off a train in any big town, there'd be a fleet of these with taxi lights on the roof. In terms of notoriety, the rock and roller Eddie Cochran actually met his end in one of these when the minicab he was in unfortunately had a crash. With these, the little fins on the back, the little crease along the top of the front wings, it's austerity Britain wanting to be exciting America. It's like a repressed bank manager who's desperate to pull on his fishnets and high-heeled shoes and rush off to watch the Rocky Horror Picture Show. Something I've just noticed actually is this is probably the first time I've ever driven a car with wing mirrors down the front of the wings I can actually see anything out of. They're not vibrating like crazy and they're actually angled quite well. Oh, this is great. This is the vacuum wipers, which as I let off the accelerator and slow down, they speed up. I stop, put my foot down again, nothing. These were a ridiculous idea. Or at least they do park themselves correctly. Then once you're cruising, it's a really comfortable car to be in. The engine is not intrusive at all. It's a nice little purr in the background, little whine from the transmission. And it just trundles along quite happily. Now sometimes you'll drive something column shift and it's just really random and vague and you can't find any gear anywhere in it. But this is a really nicely sorted one. The cables are all adjusted correctly, or possibly never needed to be adjusted correctly. They just are correct. So no hassle there. Of course the indicators are on the right hand side of the wheel. It has to be really, with your column change on the left. And it's a car that actually kind of is very easy. It's a car that's very easy to drive in traffic. It's big enough to be visible. It's very tall. I mean, compared with modern cars, it's taller than your average saloon. It's almost feels like riding in an SUV, or certainly a low SUV anyway. Oh, let's turn the wiper off and park itself with a little hiss. You got lovely visibility out of it, typical of a 60s car. The A posts and B posts are just minuscule, so you can see all the way around you. These big wraparound windscreens, front and rear, give it amazing goldfish bowl-like visibility outside. At the same time, giving you that real 50s feel to the car, to be honest, even though it's a 60s model. I guess no decade really starts until the one after is at least 5 years out of date. But it's a lovely driving thing. It really is a pleasure to be in. The steering is so direct. Or direct is the wrong word, I should say. The steering is just so tight and accurate. I know you've got to turn it a lot of times on the wheel, but it just goes exactly where you're wanting it to go. You can imagine how someone in Britain would feel driving this car back in the 60s. You'd feel so modern and futuristic. Lots of turns, lock to lock, and the wheel wiper's going crazy. You can tell the engine's bogging slightly because I'm not going slow enough to get it into first, but I'm still going a bit too quick for second. So I'll rephrase that. I'm going too quickly to get it into first, but too slowly for second. Oh, this is a disappointment with the weather. I'm going to have to take this car back now, really, before it gets absolutely soaked. But I've certainly enjoyed driving it today. That is hilarious. Every time I let go of the accelerator to change gear this and slow down, the wipers just go crazy. And as I accelerate into the rain, they slow down and virtually stop. Brilliant. But at the same time, it's enjoyable. I've enjoyed being out in it. Well, I hope you've enjoyed this little run around in Dagenham's finest Americana from the 60s. I've certainly enjoyed having a little run around, even though it started raining halfway through. Well, join me again next time for something who knows what, something different again. Thanks for watching. If you enjoyed it, please hit like and subscribe. It makes a massive difference to the channel. Oh God, so low geared this steering wheel. Right, let's go and quickly with GoPros.